You're quite sure that every general who serves should not go directly into the defense industry for 10 years? You're not willing to make that same pledge?
I'm not a general, Senator. Senator, in both of the organizations I ran, we were always completely fiscally responsible.
Yes or no, did you need an audit?
And the way
yes
my
or no, did you need an audit?
Stated,
yes or no?
Completely
what are you afraid of? You can't answer this question.
Senator, I was there on the ground. I saw
I understand, and
myself.
I respect that.
I've been there.
But you're about to be the
Secretary
of Defense
that was involved in that moment.
As we know, Trump was victorious in this last election, but the fight is just beginning. Confirmation battles underway. There are already murmurings from within the intelligence community about one of Trump's picks. It's Tulsi and Cash. They don't like them. There are a lot of stories like this one saying that former FBI and CIA officials are both warning against Trump's nominees. The question is, will they get confirmed? And how do you keep track of all the latest? Ground News. Ground News is a revolutionary app and website that gathers news stories from across the political spectrum, showing you the biases, reliability, and ownership of each story. This Tulsi story, for example, is covered by over 36 sources, and Ground News shows you exactly who is reporting what. And as you can see, most of the reporting on this story is from the right, with over half the sources covering it leaning right. Only 22% of the sources that are covering it are leaning left, which is strange because most of the people opposing Trump's nominees are on the left. But that's what's nice about Ground News. It has a blind spot feature, which helps you find stories that are being reported heavily by one side but ignored by the other. And I'm a huge fan of their For You section, a hub that curates the latest stories sorted by the issues that matter most to you. With Ground News, you get the power to sift through and analyze the gobs of information dumped in front of us all the time and access broader perspectives all in one place. And right now, you can save 40% on their Vantage plan, the same plan I use, by visiting ground.news/RGE, or just click the link below. Don't miss out on the opportunity to see what the mainstream media isn't showing you, especially during this transition and inauguration season. Check it out. Go to ground.news/RGE and take control of your news. Pete Hegseth totally dominated in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He took questions from 27 senators for over 4.5 hours and left feeling good. And it's not just our opinion on that. He went check what's happening over at Kalshi, a prediction market, and he can see that his numbers went up and up and up. So over the last couple weeks and last day or so, they now have him up at 93% is where you can see they have the prediction market, and with good reason. He was there. He took a lot of abuse from people like Tim Kaine and Elizabeth Warren. They were calling him an abuser of women and a philanderer and all these things. And he was pushing the burden back on them, explaining that they're relying on anonymous sources and they're bringing up scandalous lies that have nothing to do with his capability or his credentials to lead the Department of Defense. And he had some great support and backup from other senators like Markwayne Mullins and Tim Sheehy at the end. We saw Tuberville coming out and them explaining that Pete, relative to the prior leadership, is going to be a breath of fresh air, bring in renewed energy and vigor to the DOD. And we're looking forward to that. And they're counting down the days until this transition happens. So we've got some of the highlights. We covered the whole hearing live. It was a lot of fun, but here are some of the highlights from the hopefully new incoming Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, battling it out in front of the Senate.
Mr. Hegseth, let's continue on this line of questioning about what's sometimes referred to as women in combat. I think that phrase is something of a misnomer. Many members of this committee have served in combat in the last 25 years, to include women and men. I'm sure all those men served with women, whether they were military police officers or they were pilots or whether they were intelligence analysts or medics or what have you. You served. I assume you served with women who were on the front lines as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And were those women anything other than skilled, brave, and honorable in their service?
They were some of the best soldiers I worked with, Senator.
So women have been serving in combat for a long time. Women have been serving in combat units like infantry battalions for a long time in roles like medics or mechanics or what have you. So what we're talking about here specifically is women in ground combat roles in jobs like infantrymen or artillerymen or special forces. Right. Until about 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Under Secretary Panetta, those roles were opened up to women to serve in. Has President Trump indicated at all that he plans to rescind or alter that guidance?
You're correct to point out, Senator, that these are the decisions that the Commander-in-Chief will have the prerogative to make. He has not indicated to me that he has plans to change whether or not women would have access to these roles. However, I would point out, ensuring that standards are equal and high is of importance to him and great importance to me. Because in those ground combat roles, what is true is that the weight of the ruck on your back doesn't change. The weight of the .155 round that you have to to carry doesn't change. The weight of the 240 Bravo machine gun you might have to carry doesn't change. And so whether it's a man or a woman, they have to meet the same high standards. And Senator, in any place where those things have been eroded or in courses criteria have been changed in order to meet quotas, racial quotas or gender quotas, that is putting a focus on something other than readiness, standards, meritocracy, and lethality. So that's the kind of review I'm talking about, not whether women have access to ground combat.
Okay, so
well done.
You. So you expect no change to that guidance, but as you point out, in these specific jobs, there are irreducible physical demands. We expect our intelligence analysts and our mechanics to be physically fit in the military, but it's different when you're in the infantry or the artillery. You just mentioned a few things. Let me point it out. An artillery shell weighs almost 100 pounds. An Abrams tank round weighs around 50 pounds. The M240 Bravo machine gun with its tripod weighs almost 50 pounds. The average weight of a full kit, ammo, water, commo, body armor for a soldier is over 100 pounds. Nothing you can do can change any of those things, right? That is physical reality.
Go ahead. Yes, Senator. And I would say the requirements to handle those things in a ground combat unit, as far as standards, can look different than those of a medic or a drone pilot. And so it's not that it has to be the same standard throughout. It's standards to maximize efficacy of that particular position.
Let me read a quote here from one Army officer. While it may be difficult for a 120-pound woman to lift or drag 250 pounds, the Army cannot artificially absolve women of that responsibility. It may still exist on the battlefield. The entire purpose of creating a gender-neutral test was to acknowledge the reality that each job has objective physical standards to which all soldiers should be held, regardless of gender. The intent was not to ensure that women and men will have an equal likelihood of meeting those standards. I assume, based on your testimony, you agree with that Army officer?
Absolutely. The standards need to be the same, and they need to be high, and they need to be set by the people closest to the problem set, closest to the understanding of what is required by that job. Commanders, commanding officers, and COCOMs and elsewhere who understand the reality of what they face, that's the feedback we should get. That's what should be enshrined and enforced, and no other set of political prerogatives. When I talk about removing politics, ideological or political prerogatives should contribute to those determinations. Nothing other than the execution of the mission.
Thank you. For the record, that Army officer was Captain Kristen Griest, the Army's first female infantry officer and one of its first female Ranger School graduates. One final point. You said they need to be objective, gender neutral, and high. That's because the demands are, in fact, very high. The current physical fitness test for the Army has a minimum 2-mile run of 22 miles. Run. I want the reporter to note that I'm putting run in air quotes because 22 miles at 2 miles is not running. It may be jogging. It's probably walking fast.
A brisk walk, like the people in the malls.
We've got a big audience here. Many of them seem to be patriotic supporters of you, Mr. Hegseth. Some of them seem to be liberal critics of you. I would note that it's only the liberal critics that have disrupted this hearing.
2 miles in 22 minutes.
As was my custom during the Biden administration. I want to give you a chance to respond to what they said about you. I think the first one accused you of being a Christian Zionist. I'm not really sure why that is a bad thing. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. Zionism is that the Jewish people deserve a homeland in the ancient Holy Land where they've lived since the dawn of history. Do you consider yourself a Christian Zionist?
Senator, I am a Christian, and I robustly support the state of Israel and its existential defense, and the way America comes alongside them is a great ally.
Thank you. Because another protester, and I think this one was a member of Code Pink, which, by the way, is a Chinese Communist front group these days, said that you support Israel's war in Gaza. I support Israel's existential war in Gaza. I assume, like me and President Trump, you support that war as well, don't you?
Senator, I do. I support Israel destroying and killing every last member of Hamas.
And the third protester said something about 20 years of genocide. I assume that's our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you think our troops are committing genocide in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Senator, I do not. I think our troops, as you know, as so many in this committee know, did the best they could with what they have. And tragically, the outcome we saw in Afghanistan under the Biden administration put a stain on that, but it doesn't put a stain on what those men and women did in uniform, as you know.
So if you're confirmed as Secretary of Defense, you will oversee our military, including about 250,000 women who currently serve on active duty in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Space Forces, and the Marines. And I have serious concerns that your behavior toward women disqualifies you from serving in this role. Now, I've been trying to get answers from you for quite some time on this. You haven't wanted to meet or to answer any of my questions, so we'll just have to do it here and dive in. So going back to January 2013, you told a Fox News interviewer that women in the military simply couldn't measure up to men in the military, saying that allowing women to serve in combat roles would force the military to lower the bar. You picked up on that same theme in 2015, making remarks on Fox Fox News, referring to women in combat as, quote, it would erode standards. June 2024, you said on Ben Shapiro's podcast, quote,
what's up, Ben?
Women shouldn't be in combat at all. And then, of course, we've talked about it in 2024. You published a book, and you say on page 26 of your book, we need moms, but not in the military, especially in combat units. Page 48 of your book, you claim that women should not be in combat roles because men are distracted by women. And then 10 weeks ago, you appeared on the Sean Ryan show and said, I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. Now, I presume you recall making all these statements?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the article you're pointing to in 2013, but it underscores my argument completely because in that 2013 argument, I was talking about standards. Standards are what it's always been about,
Let's not
Senator.
have this same fight again.
Always been about,
You
Senator.
brought it
I
up.
told you directly. We've got the video. We're happy to show it. But I want to be clear here. For 12 years, you were quite open about your views, and your views were consistently the same. Women are inferior soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and guardians. And in case anyone missed the point, and these are your words from 10 weeks ago, women absolutely straight up should not be permitted to serve in combat. And I notice on each of these quotes, those are said without qualification. It's not by how much you can lift or how fast you can run. They don't belong in combat, period. Or your words, straight up. And then,
under the current
on November
standards,
9th,
that's right.
2024, just 32 days after your last public comment saying that women absolutely should not be in combat, you declared that, quote, some of our greatest warriors are women, and you support having them serve in combat. Now, that is a very, very big about face.
No, it's not.
In a very, very short period of time.
No, it isn't.
So help me
Liz.
understand, Mr. Hegseth.
Standards.
What extraordinary event happened in that 32-day period
Nothing.
that made you change
You're just too dense,
the core
Pocahontas.
values you had expressed for the preceding 12 years?
Standards. You forgot that.
Senator, again, I very much appreciate you bringing up my comments from 2013 because for me, this issue has always been about standards.
Ah!
And unfortunately, because of some of the people that have been in
Excuse
political
me, Mr.
power for the
Hegseth,
last 4
let's just
years,
stop. Let's just
priorities
stop. Let's
other
just
than
stop
standards,
right there.
lethality, and
Mr.
meritocracy
Hegseth,
have driven
I'm quoting
decision-making.
you from the podcast. Women shouldn't be in combat at all. Where is the reference to standards that they should be there if they can carry, if they can run? I don't see that at all, Mr. Hegseth. What I see is that there's a 32-day period in which you suddenly have another description about your views of women in the military. And I just want to know what changed in the
2.5
32
minutes.
days that the song you sang is not the song you come in here today to sing.
Senator, the concerns I have and the concerns that many have had, especially in ground combat units, is that in pursuit of certain percentages or quotas, standards have been changed. And that makes the combat more difficult
Let me make a
for everybody
suggestion
involved.
about what happened in that 32 days. You got a nomination from President Trump. Now, I've heard of deathbed conversions, but this is the first time I've heard of a nomination conversion. And I hope you understand that many women serving in the military right now might think that if you can convert so rapidly your long-held and aggressively pursued views in just 32 days, that 32 days after you get confirmed, maybe you'll just reverse those views and go back to the old guy who said straight up, women do not belong in combat. Now, Mr. Hegseth, you have written that after they retire, generals should be banned from working for the defense industry for 10 years. You and I agree on the corrosive effects of the revolving door between the Pentagon and defense contractors. It's something I would have liked to talk with you about if you'd come and been willing to visit
Why?
with
So
me.
you can screech it
But
in?
the question I have for you on this is, will you put your money where your mouth is and agree that when you leave this job, you will not work for the defense industry for 10 years?
Senator, it's not even a question I've thought about because
You can
it's
think
not
about it
one
right
that,
now.
It's not one, my motivation for this job
I understand
has never
that. I
been
just
about
need
what
a
could
yes or no
conceivably
here.
come next.
Time is short. I just need a yes or no.
I would consult with the president about what the policy should be
In
at the Defense
other
Department.
words, you're quite sure that every general who serves should not go directly into the defense industry for 10 years. You're not willing to make that same pledge?
I'm not a general, Senator.
You'll be the one one, let us just be clear, in charge of the generals. So you're saying sauce for the goose, but certainly not sauce for the gander?
I would want to see what the policy of the president
Oh, I'll
is.
bet you would.
Our service academies are meant to serve as our primary commissioning source of officers. It now appears that they are a breeding ground for leftist activists and champions of DEI and critical theory. Now, not all, but some. And some is way too much. How are we going to eliminate this, Mr. Hegseth? How are we going to get this back on track to where we grow our leaders? I had a young man that forever he wanted to go to West Point. I got him a nomination. I got him accepted, and he turned it down. He says, Coach, I'm not getting involved with that mess. How are we going to overcome this?
Senator, thank you for the question. And I think it comes down to leadership.
Yep, and
clear
vision at the
leadership
top.
from President Trump through me, should I be nominated. And that's what soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians see is clear leadership. It says, this is what we believe. This is the mission we're going to give you. Here's the equipment we're going to give you. And here's how we're going to support you. Because the military, at a lot of levels, Senator, has been for generations a family business. My grandfather served. I served. My daughter served. That chain has started to break with generations of people my age and older talking to their kids and grandkids, wondering, pondering, do I want them to serve? Will my country use them responsibly? When that kind of doubt is cast, you get serious recruiting problems like we do right now. You get questions about whether I want my son or daughter to follow my path in West Point, which I've heard multiple times. Would I want mine? And so you have to rip root and branch the politics and divisive policies out of these institutions and then focus them on creating and preparing actual future military leadership. West Point traditionally is focused on engineering, and rightfully so, because in our fighting forces across all services, we need the best and brightest minds in engineering, in addition to military studies. That's what I did at ROTC at Princeton, military science. That, and we need more uniformed members going back into West Point, the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, as a tour to teach with their wisdom of what they've learned in uniform, instead of just more civilian professors that came from the same left-wing woke universities that they left, and then try to push that into service academies. When that changes, Senator, I truly believe under Donald Trump, we will have a recruiting renaissance. That sends signals to the world, to our enemies and our allies alike, that America's back. And thankfully, then we have the men and women of our country willing to want to serve.
Thank you. And it's about attitude, too. And I love your attitude. You've got to be motivated. You've got to understand that people, they will hook up with you. They will understand and learn under their leaders. Why would you fight for a country that you don't love? That's what I keep hearing from a lot of our college kids, that they're getting from these woke universities that they go to. Now, and I worked at a lot of them. That is one of the excuses I get from our kids. We've got to break that. Another one, according to the Pentagon, between 2001 and 2024, the number of civilian employees in the Office of the Secretary of Defense has nearly doubled from 1,500 to 3,000.
Of course.
Civilians on Joint Chiefs has increased from 191 to almost 1,000. Our military end strength goes down. Our staff numbers are exploding. What are you going to do about that?
Senator, we're going to address that. We won World War II with 7 four-star generals. Today, we have 44 four-star generals. There's an inverse relationship between the size of staffs and victory on the battlefield. We don't need more bureaucracy at the top.
Diminishing returns.
We need more warfighters empowered at the bottom. So it's going to be my job working with those that we hire and those inside the administration to identify those places where fat can be cut so it can go toward lethality.
The signatures call on the Senate to honor the constitutional duty of advise and consent by conducting a fair, thorough confirmation process that evaluates his nomination solely on the substance and merits, his distinguished military service, academic credentials, and a bold vision for revitalizing the national defense. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record.
Without objection.
You know, there's a lot of talking about qualifications and then about us hiring him if we are the board, but there's a lot of senators here I wouldn't have on my board because there is no qualifications except your age, and you got to be living in the state and you're a citizen of the United States to be a senator. Other than the fact we got to convince a lot of people to vote for us. And then when we start talking about qualifications, if you're qualified, could the chairman tell me what the qualifications are for the Secretary of Defense?
I'd be happy
I'll read it.
for you to do that.
Let me read it for you because I Googled
I
it.
was getting some advice from my second in command.
Yeah, but I'm just making a point because there's a lot about qualifications. And I think it's so hypocritical of senators, especially on the other side of the aisle, be talking about his qualifications, not going to lead the secretary or be the Secretary of Defense. And yet your qualifications aren't any better. You guys aren't any more qualified to be the senator than I'm qualified to be the senator, except we're lucky enough to be here. But let me read you what the qualifications of the Secretary of Defense is, because I Googled it and went through a lot of different sites. And really it's hard to see. But in general, the U.S. Secretary of Defense position is filled by a civilian. That's it. If you have served in the U.S. Army Forces and have been in the service you have to be retired for at least 7 years, and Congress can weigh that. And then there's questions that the senator from Massachusetts brought up about serving on a board inside the military industry. And yet your own secretary that you all voted for, Secretary of Austin, we had to vote on a waiver because he stepped off the board of Raytheon.
Oh.
But I guess that's okay because that's a Democrat Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, they forgot about that.
But you so quickly forget about that. And then Senator Kaine, or I guess I better use the Senator of Virginia, starts bringing up the fact that what if you showed up drunk to your job? How many senators have showed up drunk to vote at night?
Mozzie might have been drunk right now.
Have any of you guys asked them to step down and resign from their job?
Pelosi's drunk all the time.
Don't tell me you haven't seen it because I know you have. And then how many senators do you know have got a divorce before cheating on their wives? Did you ask them to step down?
No.
No, but it's for show.
What about your
you
running
guys
mate's
make sure you
husband?
make a big show and point out the hypocrisy because the man's made a mistake.
Get him.
And you want to sit there and say that he's not qualified? Give me a joke. I mean, it is so ridiculous that you guys hold yourself as this higher standard and you forget you got a big plank in your eye.
Oh.
We've all made mistakes. I've made mistakes. And Jennifer, thank you for loving him through that mistake. Because the only reason why I'm here and not in prison is because my wife loved me too.
Shout out to Amazing
I have
Wives.
changed, but I'm not perfect. But I found somebody that thought I was perfect. And for whatever reason, you love Pete, and I don't know why.
Good question.
But just like our Lord and Savior forgave me, my wife's had to forgive me more than once too, and I'm sure you've had to forgive him too. And so thank you. Do you believe that you're going to be running the Secretary or the Department of Defense by yourself?
Senator, absolutely not. Just as President Trump is assembling his cabinet, I look forward and already am in the process of building one of the best possible teams you can imagine with decades and decades of experience outside of the Pentagon, driving innovation and excellence, and also inside the building, knowing how to make it happen.
So in your organizations that you did have the privilege of running, did you have a board that you...
In both organizations, we had a board.
Okay, and what did you do with that board? What kind of decisions did you make with them?
Those boards provided oversight and insight into decision-making.
They all have special, unique sets that maybe filled gaps that you're not the expertise in?
Yes, sir.
So do you believe you're capable of surrounding yourself with capable individuals that you're going to be able to run those same ideas by and surround yourself with people that are smarter and better equipped and maybe areas that you don't necessarily carry those expertise with?
Senator, the only reason I've had success in life, to include my wonderful wife, is because of people more capable around me and having the self-confidence to empower them and say, hey, run with the football, take it down the field. We'll do this together. I don't care who gets the credit. And in this case, that's how the Pentagon will be run.
Let's end with this, Mr. Chairman, about the qualifications. You got a man who has literally put his butt on the line. He served 20 years in service, multiple deployments, has heard the bullets crack over the top of his head, has been willing to go into combat, been willing to see friends die for this country, and he's willing to still put himself through this. His wife is willing to still stand beside him, knowing he wasn't perfect, knowing that all this was going to be brought up, and he's still willing to serve the country.
Mr. Hegseth, this hearing is about whether you are qualified to be Secretary of Defense, and one of the qualifications, to answer my colleague's question, is to actually win the votes of every member of this committee and to be confirmed by the United States Senate. And you need to convince us that you're worthy of that vote, because the people of the state of Illinois voted for me to be their senator so that I could cast that vote when it comes to picking who is going to be the next Secretary of Defense. This hearing now seems to be a hearing about whether or not women are qualified to serve in combat, and not about whether or not you are qualified to be Secretary of Defense.
Well, you guys keep bringing it up.
Let me just say that the American people need a SecDef who's ready to lead on day one. You are not that person. Our adversaries watch closely during times of transition, and any sense that the Department of Defense that keeps us safe is being steered by someone who's wholly unprepared for the job puts America at risk, and I am not willing to do that. With that in mind, Mr. Hegseth, I want you to try to explain to the American people, this committee, who have to vote for you, and to our troops who are deployed around the world, why you are qualified to lead the Department of Defense. We already know that you've only led the largest, a 200-person organization. We already know that you so badly mangled a budget that after you left, they had to bring in a forensic accountant to figure out what went wrong. And that the largest budget you ever managed was about $18 billion. You know, that is about 51,560 times lower than the Department of Defense budget of $825 billion. $16 million is 51,568 times smaller than the defense budget.
Yeah, and it's going to get smaller.
Please describe to me, Mr. Hegseth, you talk about DOD passing an audit. Please describe to me a time or an organization that you led underwent an audit, because you say you're going to hire smarter people than you to run this audit. I'm not asking you to be an accountant. I want you to be able to tell me what kind of guidance will be given to those employees, what will happen if whether or not you pass that audit. Have you led an audit of any organization? Yes or no? I don't want a long answer. Yes or no? Have you led an audit of any organization of which you were in charge?
Senator, in both of the organizations I ran, we were always always completely fiscally responsible.
Yes or
with the
no,
money
did
that
you
we
lead
have.
an audit?
And the way
yes
my
or
leadership
no,
has
did you lead
been
an audit?
stated
Yes or
has
no?
been completely
What are you afraid of? You
mischaracterized.
can't answer this question. Yes or no, did you lead an audit? Do you not know this answer?
Senator, every
yes or
part
no?
of my leadership
yes
of these
or no?
organizations
yes
has
or
been
no, did you lead an audit?
misrepresented
I will
from
take
top
that as
to
a no.
bottom.
What were the findings? So there were no findings because you've never led an audit. What guidance did you give the auditors? None, because you've never led an audit. Nobody expects you to be an accountant, Mr. Hegseth.
You
What
are.
we expect is for you to understand the complexity of this Pentagon budget process that is absolutely necessary to outfit our warfighters. Look, the Secretary of Defense is required to make quick decisions every single day that with high-level information that's being provided for them. A Secretary of Defense has to have breadth and depth of knowledge. Right now, I am concerned that you have neither. Mr. Hegseth, what is the highest level of international security agreement that you have led? And can you name some that the Secretary of Defense would lead? There's three main ones.
I have not been involved in international security arrangements because I have not been in government other
Okay.
than serving in the military. So my job has been to
So no, the
lead
answer is no.
men
Can
and
you
women in
name one of the
combat.
three main ones that the
You're
Secretary
talking
of
about
Defense
defense
signs?
arrangements. I mean, NATO might be one that you're referring to.
Status of Forces Agreement would be one of them.
Status of Forces Agreement. I've been a part of teaching
So-
about Status of Forces Agreements.
But you don't
inside
remember to
Afghanistan.
mention it? You're not qualified, Mr.
You're trying to
Hegseth.
give him gotcha questions,
You're not
lady.
qualified. You talk
You're not
about
even giving him an
repairing our
opportunity
defense
to answer.
industrial complex. You're not qualified to that. You could do acquisition and cross-servicing agreements, which essentially are security agreements. You can't even mention that. You've done none of those. You talked about the Indo-Pacific a little bit, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. Can you name the importance of at least one of the nations in ASEAN and what type of agreement we have with at least one of those nations? And how many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact
No, you
amount of
couldn't,
nations
because
in
you've
that,
not
but I
even
know we have
bothered to
allies
do-
in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia, trying to work
Okay.
on submarines with them.
Mr.
and data
Hegseth,
transfers
none
with
of those
them.
countries
We
are
have
in
allies
ASEAN.
across.
None of those three countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework before you prepare for these types of negotiations. Listen, Mr. Hegseth, we ask our troops to go into harm's way all the time. We ask them to go into harm's way. And this behind me is a copy of the Soldier's Creed, a copy that usually hangs over my desk here in the Senate. And you should be familiar with it. It's the same copy that hung over my desk at Walter Reed every single day that I woke up and fought my way back because I wanted to go back and serve next to my buddies who saved my life. This same copy, these words are repeated over and over and over again. And let me read out two things to you, two sentences. I will always place the mission first, and I am disciplined, physically and mentally tough, trained and proficient in my warrior task. Mr. Hegseth, our troops follow these words every single day, and they man up and they pack their rucksacks and they go to war. And they deserve a leader who can lead them, not a leader who wants to lower the standards for himself or raising the standards for other people. And by the way, our troops already meet the standards. We ask troops to man that ship, fight that fire, fly that helicopter until their very last breath. And they do that every single day, be led by someone who's not competent to do the job. How can we ask these warriors to train and perform the absolute highest standards when you are asking us to lower the standards to make you the Secretary of Defense simply because you are buddies with our president-elect? And by the way, he has filed for bankruptcy 6 times. I'm not quite sure he's the kind of CEO you want to refer to as a successful businessman.
And he led our
Let me
country
make it clear.
very well. All right, so that was painful.
You can't seem to grasp that there is no U.S. military as we know
Yes, we're
it
not
without
done.
the incredible women that we serve.
1 minute left.
Women who've earned their place in their units. You have not earned your place as Secretary of Defense. You say you care about keeping our armed forces strong and that you like that armed forces and meritocracy, then let's not lower the standards for you. You, sir, are a no-go at this station.
As the Secretary of Defense, you will be the one man standing in the breach should President Trump give an illegal order, right? I'm not saying he will, but if he does, you are going to be the guy that he calls to implement this order. Do you agree that there are some orders that can be given by the Commander-in-Chief that would violate the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, thank you for your service, but I reject the premise that President Trump is going to be giving illegal orders.
No, I'm not saying he will, but do you believe there is such a thing as an illegal order that Joe Biden or any other president, Donald Trump, could give? Is there anything that a Commander-in-Chief could ask you to do with the uniformed military that would be in violation of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, anybody of any party
Right.
could give an order that is against the Constitution or against the law.
Right.
Yeah, your
Okay, so,
administration did a
and
bunch of it.
so are you saying that you would stand in the breach and push back if you were given an illegal order?
I start by saying I reject the premise that President
I
Trump
understand
will be giving
you've done your
any
genuflecting
illegal
to him,
orders
but
at all.
This isn't a hypothetical. Your predecessor in a Trump administration, Secretary Esper, was asked and did use uniformed military to clear unarmed protesters. He was given the order to potentially shoot at them. Kilos flew low in Washington, D.C. as crowd control. He later apologized publicly for those actions. Was he right or wrong to apologize?
Senator, I was there on the ground. I saw
I understand,
the
and
helo
I
myself.
respect that.
I've been there.
But
I
you're about
understand
to
the
be
level
the
of threat
Secretary of
that was
Defense.
involved in that moment.
So he was he-
legality and the
Sir,
Constitution.
was he
and
right
the laws
or
of what
wrong
you
to
have.
apologize?
I'm not going to put words in the mouth of Secretary Esper or
No,
anybody else.
he said them himself. You don't have to. What are you scared
have
of?
to interpret those.
Did he do the right thing by apologizing?
I'm not scared of anything, Senator.
Then say
I'm
yes or no.
interested
You
in
can say
upholding
no.
the laws and the Constitution
Okay.
in any
So
particular
Donald
scenario.
Trump asked for the active duty 82nd Airborne to be deployed during that same time. Secretary Esper has written that he convinced him against that decision. If Donald Trump asked you to use the 82nd Airborne in law enforcement roles in Washington, D.C., would you also convince him otherwise?
I'm not going to get ahead of conversations I would have with the president. However, there are laws and processes inside our Constitution that
There
would
we
be
go.
foul.
Yeah, that's
President
right.
Trump said in November that he is willing to consider using the active duty military against the, quote, enemy within. Have you been personally involved in discussions of using the U.S. military active duty inside the United States?
Senator, I'm glad we finally got to the topic of border security equaling national security because
That's a
it's
good
been
idea.
abdicated and ignored for the last 4 years.
That wasn't my question. I'm just asking, have you been involved? You're about to be the Secretary of Defense potentially. Have you been involved in discussions about using the active duty military inside the United States?
Senator, I am not yet the Secretary of Defense.
Right. I'm
if
just asking.
confirmed, I would be party to any number of
So you haven't been in any of these
which I would not
conversations?
reveal what I have discussed with the President of the United States.
Just
or
have
not.
you been in conversations? Again, you're going to be in charge of 3 million people. The active duty that I know you care about, I believe you care about. So have you been in conversations about using the active duty in any way, whether it's setting up in detention camps, policing dangerous cities? Have you been involved in any of those conversations?
Certainly, I have been involved in conversations relating to doing things this administration has not, which is secure the southern border
Let's go.
and not allow floods of illegals
So
to
are
enter
you-
our country
so-
through an invasion
Okay.
that threatens the American people.
Okay,
And there
I
are
got it.
ways in which the military is already playing a role in that, to include 5,000 National
Do you
Guardsmen from
believe
Indiana and
that the
Texas.
U.S.
We're at the border right now, allowing for border
Will
security.
you
So there is
ask the
plenty of
active
precedent
duty
for
military
military
to
members
staff
enforcing
detention
our southern
centers?
border.
Our U.S. military is not trained in law enforcement roles. I think you know that, right? We've seen how that mission is difficult for them in places like Iraq and Afghanistan because that's not the training a uniformed military comes with. Do you support the use of active duty military in supporting detention camps?
Senator, everything we will do would be lawful and under the Constitution,
Okay,
but
I'm
I
gonna take that as a
recognize
yes.
Yeah,
that
good
this
answer.
administration has abdicated its responsibility. President Trump is going to
Okay,
restore
in the
order at
spirit
the border,
of preserving
prevent our
the
enemies from
institution,
invading, and yes, he has said
Sir,
mass
I get your
deportations
filibustering.
will be
I get it. I get
a part
it.
of what
In the
happens.
spirit of preserving the institution that I think we both care about, legitimately, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I've heard a couple of different things. One, you said you will not change the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is what governs justice system in the military. Yes or no? You said that earlier.
Those are
I'm just
laws,
confirming.
Senator, set by Congress.
Okay, so you will not go to change it. You will not attempt to change it. You also said that JAG officers are potentially people who put their own interests in their own medals and promotions ahead of the troops. Senator Lindsey Graham was a JAG officer for most of his life. Is that what you believe
Yes.
about those who implement our justice system in the U.S. military?
Don't say that, Pete.
Senator, I was speaking about particular JAG officers I've had to deal with in my military
Are you
experience,
gonna get
not about a
involved?
member of the United States Senate.
Are you, as Secretary
Graham's
of
terrible,
Defense, going to get involved in the implementation of
He is
the
a
U.S.
jag-off.
military code of justice?
Senator, ultimately, it will be a big part of my job to evaluate decisions vis-a-vis
Okay, so I'll
the
take
Uniform
that.
Code of
I'll
Military
take that as
Justice.
yes. Have
and
you seen
do it fairly.
is CQ Brown on your list in the Warrior boards to be removed from his position?
Senator, every single senior officer will be reviewed based on meritocracy, standards, lethality, and commitment to lawful orders they will be given.
All right, no vote today. They'll come back and vote later. I can't imagine that the squishy Republicans are going to reject him on that panel. So we'll keep our eye on that one, my friends. We're looking forward to more confirmation hearings here, and we're looking forward to the inauguration. And so I want to invite you to our inauguration watch party on Monday in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's going to be amazing. We're going to watch Trump get inaugurated live in person. Get your tickets. They're $100. The cost includes the food, the venue. We're going to have a photo booth lined up, or a photo set up, so we can all take amazing pictures together. It's going to be a ton of fun. So come celebrate this historic day with us at the Mar-a-Lago in the Southwest. Get your tickets, watchyourlodge.com. Bring your friends. It's going to be a ton of fun, and we're putting the finishing touches on everything.